Who cried for these people? That was the haunting question Pope Francis asked as he stood on the shores of Lampedusa, gazing at the sea that had just claimed the lives of hundreds of migrants. It wasn't just a rhetorical question. It was a challenge to the world's conscience. In a time when fences grow taller and compassion grows colder, one man chose to walk a different path. A man dressed not in royal robes, but in humility. A man who traded the palatial apostolic palace for a modest guest house. A man who speaks not from a throne, but from the streets, the refugee camps, and the hospital bedsides. This is the story of a pope unlike any other. A story of radical love. A story of justice for those the world forgets. From rescuing Syrian refugees on his personal plane, to calling world leaders to account on climate change, to personally comforting war victims in Gaza, Pope Francis has redefined what it means to lead. But behind each act of courage lies a deeper truth that justice begins not with power, but with presence. In this video, we follow his extraordinary journey to stand with the voiceless, the marginalized, and the broken. Because sometimes the quietest voice is the one that changes everything. Are you ready to listen? 1. The poor are at the center of the gospel. Let's begin with a fundamental truth that Pope Francis emphasized throughout his papacy. The poor are at the center of the gospel. From the very start, Pope Francis made it clear that caring for the poor isn't optional. It's essential to living out the gospel. He reminded us that our faith is deeply intertwined with how we treat the most vulnerable among us. In his apostolic exhortation, Evangelii Gaudium, he wrote, "We have to state, without mincing words, that there is an inseparable bond between our faith and the poor. May we never abandon them." But these weren't just words. Pope Francis lived this message daily. He chose the name Francis in honor of Saint Francis of Assisi, the patron saint of the poor, signaling his commitment to a church that serves the marginalized. He often spoke about the dangers of a society that prioritizes wealth over people. In Evangelii Gaudium, he warned against an economy of exclusion, stating, "Such an economy kills." Pope Francis didn't just speak about these issues. He took action. He lived in a modest guest house instead of the grand apostolic palace, and he made it a point to reach out to those on the margins. One powerful example of his commitment was his visit to the island of Lampedusa in 2013. There, he mourned the deaths of migrants who had drowned trying to reach Europe, and decried the globalization of indifference. In 2016, he took 12 Syrian refugees back to Rome with him from a trip to Lesbos, Greece, personally intervening to provide them with safety and a new start. Pope Francis also challenged the church to be more inclusive and compassionate. He emphasized that the church should be a field hospital after battle, tending to the wounded and the broken. He reminded us that the poor have much to teach us. In Evangelii Gaudium, he wrote, "They have much to teach us. Not only do they share in the sensus fidei, but in their difficulties they know the suffering Christ." So what does this mean for us today? It means that we are called to see the face of Christ in the poor, to listen to their stories, and to stand in solidarity with them. It means advocating for policies that promote social justice and protect the vulnerable. It also means examining our own lives. Are we living simply? Are we generous with our time and resources? Are we attentive to the needs of those around us? Pope Francis challenged us to move beyond charity and towards justice. He called for structural changes to address the root causes of poverty and inequality. In his encyclical Laudato Si, he linked care for the poor with care for the environment, emphasizing that the two are interconnected. He wrote, "We are faced not with two separate crises, one environmental and the other social, but rather with one complex crisis, which is both social and environmental." Pope Francis's message is clear. To follow Christ is to care for the poor. It's not an optional part of our faith, it's at the very heart of it. So let's take his words to heart. Let's open our eyes to the suffering around us, open our hearts to compassion, and open our hands to serve. Because when we serve the poor, we serve Christ. 2. The fateful journey to Lampedusa. Let's delve into a pivotal moment that defined Pope Francis's commitment to the marginalized, his visit to Lampedusa. In July 2013, just months into his papacy, Pope Francis chose the Italian island of Lampedusa for his first pastoral visit outside Rome. This wasn't a grand political statement or a diplomatic tour. It was a heartfelt pilgrimage to the periphery, a place where hope and despair collided daily. Lampedusa, situated closer to North Africa than to mainland Italy, had become a primary entry point for migrants fleeing conflict, poverty, and persecution. The Mediterranean Sea, once a symbol of connection, had turned into a graveyard for thousands seeking a better life. Upon arrival, Pope Francis threw a wreath into the sea, mourning the countless lives lost in treacherous crossings. He then celebrated Mass on an altar, constructed from the remnants of a migrant boat, a poignant symbol of tragedy and resilience. In his homily, he posed a haunting question: has anyone wept? He lamented the globalization of indifference, a societal numbness to the suffering of others. He challenged us to confront our apathy and recognize the humanity in every migrant's story. But Pope Francis didn't stop at words. He met with survivors, listened to their harrowing tales, and offered solace. His actions spoke volumes, embodying the Church's mission to stand with the oppressed. This visit wasn't just symbolic, it was a call to action. It urged governments, institutions, and individuals to reevaluate their responses to migration crises. It emphasized that behind every statistic is a human being with dreams, fears, and a right to dignity. In today's world where migration remains a contentious issue, Pope Francis's journey to Lampedusa serves as a timeless reminder. It challenges us to replace indifference with empathy, to see beyond borders, and to uphold the inherent worth of every person. 3. Personally rescuing refugees. Let's explore a powerful moment when Pope Francis transformed compassion into action. In April 2016, amidst the escalating refugee crisis, Pope Francis visited the Greek island of Lesbos, a primary entry point for migrants fleeing conflict and poverty. Accompanied by Ecumenical Patriarch Bartholomew I and Archbishop Hieronymus II, he aimed to highlight the humanitarian emergency unfolding at Europe's doorstep. During his visit, Pope Francis toured the Moria refugee camp, where he met with hundreds of asylum seekers living in dire conditions. He listened to their stories, offered prayers, and provided comfort to those who had endured unimaginable hardships. But he didn't stop there. In a surprising and unprecedented move, Pope Francis brought 12 Syrian refugees, members of 3 Muslim families, including 6 children, back to Rome with him aboard the papal plane. These families had fled war-torn areas in Syria, and their homes had been destroyed. This act was more than symbolic. It was a direct challenge to the indifference shown by many nations toward the refugee crisis. By personally welcoming these families, Pope Francis emphasized that refugees are not mere statistics. They are individuals with names, faces, and stories deserving of dignity and compassion. The Vatican, in collaboration with the community of Sant'Egidio, took responsibility for the refugees' care, providing them with housing, education, and support to integrate into their new lives. This initiative demonstrated a model of how faith communities can actively participate in addressing global humanitarian issues. Pope Francis's actions serve as a profound example of leadership grounded in empathy and moral conviction. He didn't just speak about the plight of refugees. He took tangible steps to alleviate their suffering. In today's world where debates about immigration often become polarized, Pope Francis's example challenges us to see beyond politics and focus on our shared humanity. His actions remind us that compassion knows no borders, and that we each have a role to play in supporting those in need. As we reflect on this powerful gesture, let's consider how we can embody the same spirit of generosity and solidarity in our own communities. Whether through advocacy, volunteering, or simply extending kindness to those around us, we can all contribute to building a more compassionate and just world. 4. Accompanying those abandoned by war. Let's delve into a profound example of Pope Francis's unwavering commitment to those suffering amid conflict. In the final 18 months of his life, Pope Francis established a nightly ritual that brought solace to a beleaguered community. He called the Holy Family Catholic Church in Gaza every evening. This church, the only Catholic parish in the Gaza Strip, had become a refuge for nearly 600 people, Christians and Muslims alike, seeking shelter from the relentless bombardment during the Israel-Hamas war that erupted in October 2023. Each night, around 7 p.m., the Pope would reach out via WhatsApp to Father Gabriel Romanelli, the parish priest, and his assistant, Father Yusuf Assad. Despite being hospitalized towards the end of his life, Pope Francis remained steadfast in this practice, offering prayers, words of encouragement, and a reminder that they were not forgotten. These calls were more than mere gestures, they were lifelines. In a region where communication was often severed and hope was in short supply, the Pope's voice provided a beacon of compassion and solidarity. He would often tell them, "I am with you," reinforcing the message that their suffering was seen and shared. The impact of these nightly calls was profound. Members of the Holy Family Church described Pope Francis as a father figure and a saint of Gaza. His consistent outreach offered emotional support and a sense of global solidarity to a community feeling isolated and abandoned. In his final public address on Easter Sunday, Pope Francis once again called for a ceasefire in Gaza and condemned the dire humanitarian situation. His unwavering advocacy for peace and justice resonated deeply with those affected by the conflict. Pope Francis's actions serve as a powerful reminder of the importance of presence and empathy in times of crisis. His nightly calls were not grand political statements, but simple acts of compassion that had a profound impact. As we reflect on his legacy, let's consider how we can embody the same spirit of solidarity in our own lives, whether it's reaching out to someone in need, advocating for peace, or simply offering a listening ear. We all have the capacity to make a difference. 5. Fighting for climate justice. Let's now explore how Pope Francis became a leading voice in the fight against climate change, intertwining environmental stewardship with social justice. In 2015, Pope Francis released the groundbreaking encyclical Laudato Si', subtitled On Care for Our Common Home. This document wasn't just a call to protect the environment. It was a moral and spiritual plea to recognize the interconnectedness of all creation and the urgent need to address the ecological crisis. He emphasized that climate change disproportionately affects the poor and marginalized, stating, "We are faced not with two separate crises, one environmental and the other social, but rather with one complex crisis which is both social and environmental." Pope Francis didn't shy away from challenging powerful interests. He criticized the overconsumption and profit-driven mentality that leads to environmental degradation, urging a shift towards sustainable practices and policies. His advocacy extended beyond words. In 2023, he released Laudato Si', a follow-up exhortation that reiterated the need for decisive action against climate change and called out major polluters and climate change deniers. Pope Francis's commitment to climate justice also involved active participation in global discussions. He addressed international forums, urging world leaders to prioritize the environment and the well-being of future generations. His efforts inspired many within the Church and beyond to take action. The Laudato Si' movement, for instance, mobilized Catholics worldwide to engage in environmental advocacy and sustainable practices. In a world grappling with environmental challenges, Pope Francis's message serves as a powerful reminder that caring for the earth is not just an ecological concern, but a profound act of justice and compassion. 6. Inclusion, not exclusion. Let's explore how Pope Francis championed a church that embraces everyone, especially those who have long felt marginalized. From the outset of his papacy, Pope Francis emphasized the importance of inclusivity. He envisioned a church that serves as a welcoming home for all, stating, "The church is not a toll house. It is the house of the Father, where there is a place for everyone." A shift in tone. In 2013, when asked about gay priests, Pope Francis responded, "If someone is gay and he searches for the Lord and has goodwill, who am I to judge?" This marked a significant departure from previous rhetoric and signaled a more compassionate approach toward LGBTQ+ individuals. He later met with parents of LGBTQ+ children, assuring them that the church does not exclude LGBTQ children because she loves them deeply. Concrete actions. Pope Francis's commitment to inclusion wasn't limited to words. In 2023, he approved a document allowing priests to bless same-sex couples, emphasizing that such blessings are expressions of pastoral care and not endorsements of same-sex unions as marriages. Furthermore, the Vatican clarified that transgender individuals could be baptized and serve as godparents, provided they lead lives consistent with the faith. A broader embrace. Pope Francis also extended his message of inclusion to other marginalized groups. He advocated for the rights of migrants, the poor, and those affected by war and climate change. His encyclical Fratelli Tutti called for universal fraternity and social friendship, urging societies to reject exclusion and embrace solidarity. Challenges and criticisms. While many praise Pope Francis's inclusive approach, he faced criticism from conservative factions within the Church. Some viewed his actions as departures from traditional doctrine. However, Pope Francis maintained that his efforts were rooted in the core Christian principles of love, mercy, and compassion. A legacy of compassion. Pope Francis's emphasis on inclusion has left a lasting impact on the Catholic Church and beyond. His actions have inspired many to reevaluate their perceptions and to approach others with greater empathy and understanding. As we reflect on his legacy, let's consider how we can embody the same spirit of inclusivity in our own lives, whether it's reaching out to someone who feels excluded or advocating for the rights of marginalized communities. We all have a role to play in building a more compassionate world. Number 7. Reforming the Church from within. Let's explore how Pope Francis undertook the monumental task of transforming the Catholic Church from the inside out. When Pope Francis assumed the papacy in 2013, he inherited a church grappling with internal crises, ranging from financial scandals to a loss of credibility among the faithful. Recognizing the need for profound change, he embarked on a mission to reform the Church's very structure and culture, revamping the Roman Curia. One of his most significant initiatives was the overhaul of the Roman Curia, the central governing body of the Church. In 2022, he promulgated the Apostolic Constitution Predicate Evangelium, which redefined the Curia's role as a service-oriented body rather than a hierarchical power structure. This reform aimed to foster greater collaboration and transparency within the Church's administration. Promoting synodality, Pope Francis championed the concept of synodality, a model of governance that emphasizes listening, dialogue, and collective discernment. The Synod on Synodality, initiated in 2021, was a testament to this vision. For the first time, women were granted voting rights in a synod, marking a historic step toward inclusivity. Financial transparency and accountability. Addressing financial misconduct, Pope Francis implemented stringent measures to ensure fiscal responsibility within the Vatican. He established the Secretariat for the Economy and appointed independent auditors to oversee financial operations, signaling a commitment to transparency and ethical stewardship. Empowering the laity, recognizing the vital role of lay people, Pope Francis encouraged their active participation in church life. He appointed lay experts to key Vatican positions and emphasized the importance of their contributions to the Church's mission. This shift aimed to break down clericalism and promote a more inclusive church community. Facing resistance. Despite these efforts, Pope Francis faced significant opposition from conservative factions within the Church. Critics argued that his reforms threatened traditional doctrines and practices. However, Francis remained steadfast, believing that renewal was essential for the Church to remain relevant and faithful to its mission. A legacy of courageous reform. Pope Francis's internal reforms were not merely administrative changes. They were a reflection of his deep commitment to a church that embodies compassion, humility, and justice. His actions challenged the status quo and inspired a global conversation about the Church's role in the modern world. As we reflect on his transformative leadership, we're reminded that meaningful change often begins from within. Pope Francis's legacy encourages us to examine our own institutions and communities, striving for integrity, inclusivity, and a relentless pursuit of justice. As we conclude this exploration of Pope Francis's remarkable journey, we're reminded that his legacy is not confined to the annals of history but lives on through each of us. His unwavering commitment to the marginalized, his calls for environmental stewardship, and his efforts to reform the Church from within serve as a beacon for all seeking justice and compassion in today's world. Pope Francis taught us that true leadership involves listening to the cries of the poor, embracing those on the fringes, and challenging systems that perpetuate inequality. His actions weren't merely symbolic, they were tangible steps toward a more inclusive and loving world. Now, the torch passes to us. How can we embody the values he championed? Perhaps it's through small acts of kindness, standing up against injustice, or simply being more mindful of our impact on the planet. Every action counts. Thank you for joining us on this journey. If this video resonated with you, please consider liking it, subscribing to our channel, and sharing your thoughts in the comments below. Your engagement helps us continue to share stories that inspire and uplift. Together, let's carry forward Pope Francis's mission of love, justice, and unity.